Ron Wiseman, couldn't wait to get home to Amy, his beloved wife of 10 years. Not only was she a beautiful woman who kept herself in great shape, but she was also a fantastic cook and the best lover a man could ask for. The previous day, Amy had said that she wanted to invite her new boss, Mike Armstrong, to her home for dinner. According to her, he wanted to meet her husband and get a feel for the situation in her family. Ron saw nothing wrong with this and said that he would like to meet her new boss, especially since the last two people who held this position did not last long and left under somewhat mysterious circumstances. The most recent person to hold the position quit after just a few months on the job, saying he needed to take an extended sabbatical in Sri Lanka to find himself, and the man before him was found decapitated in his garage with his hands behind his back. Police said it was a suicide, but his genitals, which were surgically removed, were never found. Ron noticed the time and sent a message to his wife before locking his office, telling her he was on his way. Her answer came instantly. "See you soon. Love you." Ron said goodbye to his secretary and headed home, stopping only to buy a bouquet of roses for his wife. He liked to do things like that to surprise her, and she liked to receive gifts of love from him. She also liked to thank him for small gifts. Ron pulled into his driveway, noticing a black Mercedes parked on the curb in front of his house. At least this man had the sense to stay out of my driveway, Ron thought. He entered the house and saw a well-dressed man of about 45 sitting on the sofa. Ron looked him up and down. He was quite tall, seemed well-built, with light gray hair at the temples. He was clean-shaven and seemed to have one of those eternal grins on his face. He stood up with a wry smile on his face as Ron walked into the room and held out his hand. Ron shook it before apologizing. He walked into the kitchen and handed Amy the bouquet before pulling her into his arms. Her face lit up as she accepted the flowers. "I'll have to thank you properly for that later," she whispered. Ron kissed his wife's pretty face. "Now be a good host and go say hello to Mike," she said. Ron kissed her again and returned to the living room. He walked over to his bar with drinks and offered Mike a shot of whiskey, which he accepted. The two men sat down in the living room after Ron had spilled the liquor. "Well, you have a wife," Mike said, and his crooked smile became even more noticeable. "I have to agree," said Ron. "She is the meaning of my life." "Then I think you'll understand why I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do," Mike said. "Really?" asked Ron. "What is this?" "I'm going to fuck your pretty little wife," Mike said. "She will like it, and you will watch." "Hold that thought for a second," Ron said. "I'll be right back." He went into the kitchen. "I'm going to show Mike around a little," he said. "We'll be right back." Amy gave him a knowing look. "Don't be late, dear," she said. "Dinner will be ready in about 15 or 20 minutes." "Great," said Ron. He returned to the front room. "I hope you didn't tell your wife what I said," Mike said. Ron shook his head. No, said Ron. "Let's go into my cave, okay?" he said, gesturing for Mike to follow him. Mike stood up and followed Ron into his office, also known as his personal man cave. Mike looked at what was hanging on the walls. In addition to the photographs, several official commendations, medals, knives, and pistols, and several swords hung on the wall. "So, are you going to study? Sex with my wife, isn't it?" asked Ron. Mike nodded his head. "Yes, I'm going to," he said, grinning. "Do you have any problems with this?" "I take it my wife never told you about me," Ron said. "She told me you're an accountant doing research for some special task force," he said. "Yes," Ron said. "It's true that I'm a certified public accountant, and yes, I do work on a joint federal-private task force. But I wasn't always an accountant." "About?" said Mike. Ron pointed to the objects on the wall. "You know, I once served in the Army. I was a scout sniper at the time," Ron said. "Most of my 150 confirmed sniper kills were made from a distance of 300 to 600 meters. But I successfully hit targets at a distance of up to 1,200 meters. This is more than a kilometer, and at such a distance, you will never hear a shot. 1 second, you are alive and breathing, and the next, You are dead." He pulled out a desk drawer and ran his hands through his collection of knives. Mike wasn't very comfortable by this time, and it got worse when Ron pulled out one very large knife. "I'm also quite happy with close-range kills," he said, holding the sharp blade so Mike could see it. "There is nothing better than seeing your enemy take his last breath, up close and personal." Mike's face turned white, and his grin disappeared. "Look, Ron, it's nothing personal," Mike muttered. "Oh, but that's true, Mike," said Ron. "You just told me you were going to have my wife, and you expect me to watch. This makes it very personal to me. I just want you to know what you're risking. You see, I believe in the old saying that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I'm sure you understand." He looked at his watch. "Oh, I think dinner is about to be ready. We better go back," he said. Mike nodded his head and watched in horror as Ron threw the knife at a thick target on the far wall. The knife hit the center exactly before plunging halfway. "I like to practice," Ron told Amy's ashen boss. They headed into the dining room, where Amy set a table for three, placing the bouquet Ron had brought home in the center. As always, she seated Ron at the head of the table, Mike to his left, and herself to his right. They sat down, and Ron took Amy's hand. He extended his hand to Mike. "We like to say a prayer before eating," he said. Mike gently took Ron's hand. Amy and Ron bowed their heads and closed their eyes. Mike followed suit, not knowing what to expect. "God," said Ron, "thank you for this food we're about to eat. Thank you for your many blessings to our home and our family. May you continue to bless us with your wisdom and grace. Amen." "I hope everyone enjoys this," Amy said, opening the plates to reveal succulent Cornish hen, one of Ron's favorite dishes. "I started cooking it on low heat this morning." "This is delicious, dear," said Ron, taking a large bite. "Don't you agree, Mike?" Mike nodded nervously in agreement. "Yes, it's very tasty," he said. "You cook wonderfully, Amy." Ron noticed Mike looking at him nervously as he complimented Amy on her cooking. "Don't worry, Mike," he said. "I never kill anyone at the dinner table, do I, dear?" Mike's face paled as Amy nodded approvingly. "Not without good reason," she said. "It can get quite messy, and I really don't like having to clean blood off the tablecloth," she added. "After all, she is over 100 years old." "By the way, honey," said Ron, "Mike told me he plans to have you, and he wants me to watch. Did you know anything about this?" "Really?" asked Amy. "No, he never told me anything about it." She looked at Mike. "Is it true, Mike? Are you planning to sleep with me?" "Please, Amy, I didn't say that. Maybe your husband misunderstood me," Mike said, shaking his head. Ron pulled out a tiny digital voice recorder and pressed a button. "I'm going to have your pretty little wife," said Mike's voice. "She will like it, and you will watch." Mike's face turned red as Amy shook her head. "What's wrong with you?" asked Amy. "We welcome you into our home, feed you, offer our hospitality, and this is how you pay us." "Please," Mike said. "It was just a joke. I was just joking." "Well, that's it, dear," said Ron. "He was just joking." "I don't know," she said. "What is the climax? I'm not laughing." "Look, that's not what I meant," Mike said, raising his hands. "Really?" "Is that what you told the husband of the last wife you slept with?" asked Ron. "What are you talking about?" Mike asked. "I told you that I am a researcher." "I checked you out when Amy told me about you," Ron said. "According to my research, you were quietly fired from Acme Enterprises 3 months ago after you were named in a civil suit for alienation of affection. The man who filed this lawsuit was the husband of the woman he divorced after he caught you two naked in a hotel room." Mike looked down at his plate. "This is true?" Amy asked Mike. "Yes," Mike said quietly. "I did something I'm not proud of, but that's all in the past." "Speaking of the past," said Ron, "I also learned that Mike's ex-wife was so tired of his cheating that she turned to a group called the Mutual Marriage Insurance Society, or MMAS. Isn't that true, Mike?" "Yes, it's true," he said. "I even saw the video of the punishment she was going to give him," Ron told Amy. "Quite cruel, actually. I would have thought that this would make you change your habits, but that didn't happen, did it, Mike? Mike looked at him in shock. How do you know about this? He asked. It should have remained a secret. Mike, Ron said, shaking his head. I told you that I am a researcher. I have access to information you won't believe. It was my task force that stood up for your wife on her behalf. Don't you remember? Ron looked at Amy. After we contacted his wife, she agreed to give him a choice. Either he accepts the punishment and remains married, or he agrees to a fair divorce settlement. I think he didn't want such humiliation, so he agreed to the divorce. Ron looked back at Mike. You know, you really dodged a bullet with that one, he said. What punishment was she going to give him? Asked Amy. Cruel stuff, said Ron. Mike would have been tied up and severely beaten to the core of his manhood. He would be forced to watch his wife have sex with multiple men. She would brand him and use him as her pony. Not a very nice picture. Asked Amy. Branded, huh? Yeah, said Ron. Right on his ass. Slowly. Mike winced at the memory. And your group saved his ass? Asked Amy. Ron nodded his head. Unfortunately. Obviously he hasn't learned his lesson, Ron said. Maybe we should teach him that lesson, Amy said. Here, tonight. Ron nodded his head. You might be onto something, honey, he said. He looked at Mike, who was shaking his head furiously. No, please don't do this, he begged, looking from Ron to Amy. Why not? Asked Ron. Obviously you didn't receive this message earlier. Maybe we should teach you that it's not okay to have sex with other people's wives. I still have your ex-wife's number. Maybe we should invite her over to help teach you a lesson. And I have many things that I can use to cause you a lot of pain. Ron looked at Amy. You know, I still have that knife-throwing board in the basement, he said. What are you talking about? Said Mike. You know, one of those moving boards used in the art of knife-throwing. Surely you have seen them. The assistant, usually a scantily clad woman, is sometimes strapped to the board, and the thrower must bring the knives as close as possible without hitting her. I think it was called Wheel of Death. We can strip Mike naked, tie him spread eagle to the board, and see how close we can get to his dignity without cutting it off, he said. He looked at Mike. Wouldn't that be funny? He asked. You know, Amy is also good at throwing knives, but not as good as me. Isn't that the board that rotates? Asked Amy. Ron nodded his head. Oh yeah, that would be funny. We can place bets to see who comes closest. She looked at Mike. Come on, Mike. That would be amazing. Mike jumped out of his chair, his face white, his eyes wide, and his body physically shaking in terror. No, he said. You people are crazy. Look, it was just a joke. Please forget I said anything. He tried to turn away, but Ron grabbed him and pushed him against the wall. Sorry, mate, we're not laughing, Ron said. Please, Mike begged. What should I do to make this stop? It's easy, said Ron. From now on, you will forget about any thought of sex with my wife or any other wife except your own. And you will become the embodiment of professionalism. There won't be any late-night work and definitely no out-of-town business trips with Amy if I'm not there. And you will treat every woman with the respect she deserves. And that's all? Mike asked. Ron nodded. Yeah, pretty much, said Ron. Just know that I will be watching. And if you screw up, you'll pay the price you should have paid a long time ago. Understood? Mike nodded his head. Fine. Now, is there something you want to tell us? Mike nodded his head again. I'm sorry. In fact, it is true. I will never do anything like that to anyone again, he said. Please accept my apologies and forgive me. Ron looked at his wife. What do you think, dear? He asked. Should we forgive him? Well, honey, she said, we really believe in forgiveness. So, yes, we will forgive him this time. Ron loosened his grip on Mike's throat. He looked at his wife. So, what are we having for dessert? He asked. I made a really delicious cheesecake, she said. Boys, would you like a piece? Ron looked at Mike, who was shaking in horror. Well, how about dessert? He asked Mike, who shook his head. No thanks, he said. I really need to go home. Ron noticed that Amy was looking at Mike's trousers and looked down. He saw the wet spot on Mike's pants and shook his head. Yeah, I understand why you had to go home, Ron said, noticing the smell coming from Mike's trousers. Come on, get out of here, and remember what I said. I'll do it, Mike said, heading towards the front door. They both noticed a wet spot on the back of his pants as he headed out. Can you believe he actually shit his pants? Asked Ron. Yes, disgusting, isn't it? Amy said in response. And he actually thought he was going to fuck me. What the hell? Maybe I should bring him a box of chocolates tomorrow. Ron laughed. Hearing the squeal of tires, Ron turned to his pretty wife. God, I'm so fucking horny for you right now. They made love. Finally, they freed themselves and looked at the table. Do you think this cheesecake will last until tomorrow? Asked Ron. Amy nodded her head. Oh, yes, she said. Let's clean up this mess and then finish dessert upstairs, okay? Please like and subscribe to the channel and you will never be cheated on.